Hi, everybody. Welcome to our third workshop on Composable Commerce. My name is Foha Khalid, and I am the one who will be walking you through these Composable Commerce workshops where we get into Composable Commerce, the questions that are frequently asked, the different areas of it, and how to basically get a basic understanding of how to set up Composable. So I am sharing my screen. This is the content that we'll be covering today in this session. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is what APIs are used in Composable Commerce. The second is delving into SCAPI. So we're going to discuss the difference between OCAPI and SCAPI APIs. We're going to discuss what SCAPI is, how to use it. Then we're going to discuss how to add customizations and extend SCAPI hook with hooks and custom APIs. And finally, we're going to have a small exercise where we can demonstrate what we've understood or learned today and basically put it to test. So the first thing that we're going to discuss today is SCAPI and OCAPI APIs. There are two main groups of APIs, they're namely OCAPI and SCAPI. OCAPI is Open Commerce API and SCAPI is our Shopper Commerce API. So OCAPI is more of the older version. It is legacy now, and it basically used to come in two types, which are Shop API and Data API. It is still used, but it's just the older version of APIs that were provided by Salesforce B2C Commerce. And there were some limitations in OCAPI, which is why there was some revision and why there was a new type of API that was introduced. Those limitations were basically that there is a need to configure OCAPI from the business manager, and it's also in terms of headless or in terms of having a custom front end and PWA kit. It wasn't the most optimal solution or the most optimal API. This is where SCAPI comes in. So a new RESTful API was introduced by Salesforce with the name of SCAPI. And the SCAPI, which is the Shopper Commerce API, it basically allows your front end to communicate with your backend directly without having to intervene and without having to go through the middleman of the account manager in order to like define scopes or in order to give permissions for the API. Salesforce does have some recommendations for all existing customers and new customers to move over to SCAPI. This isn't because OCAPI is deprecated, but it's actually because all of the efforts or all of the attention right now is being given to SCAPI, where there are numerous new endpoints being developed for SCAPI, whereas OCAPI, on the other hand, is just in maintenance mode. So the best thing right now for customers who are going through major refactoring, for customers who are currently on Salesforce and they're moving to Salesforce, it's best for them to opt for SCAPI. So SCAPI, just like OCAPI, it has two main groups of APIs, and they're basically the Shopper and the Shopper API and the Admin API. So the Shopper API, it's designed for mainly customer-facing functionalities. So anything that includes, adding to your basket, browsing, shopping your cart, anything that's related to checkout, something that your shopper or your end user would be doing, that is something that is covered by the Shopper API. And your Admin API is more aimed at merchandising, so your catalog, your inventory, taking care of order management, all of that stuff is covered with the SCAPI Admin API. So these APIs, both of these APIs that we've mentioned for SCAPI, they basically rely on an SLAS service, which is basically an OAuth 2 standards-based authentication service, and it provides a lot of benefits. So this idea of SLAS that was introduced that is used for authentication, it basically comes with the ability to issue JWT tokens for both public as well as private clients. JWT is efficient as well as secure. You've got the ability to use OAuth scopes for defining API permissions. So you can, you can decide whether you want to give permissions to specific areas like shopper basket for products, what kind of permissions you want to give. Is it going to be read? Is it going to be write? Although in case of shopper APIs, they are generally read only, except for a couple like baskets. But you do still have the ability to choose in, for example, the basket. In the basket scope, you are able to define what kind of permission you want to give. It also supports refresh tokens. So you have long-lived renewable sessions where the customer is not required to log in over and again. It allows integration with multiple identity providers like you've got Okta or Azure. And another very popular thing that is gaining a lot of hype nowadays is the passwordless login for better UX and security. So this is also something that is enabled by the SLAS. And you don't have any dependency on the account manager, unlike the admin APIs on OCAPI, where you had to authenticate each call. So every time you made an API request, you would have to manually go and authenticate it, which is not the case over here with SLAS. So your SCAPI shopper API and your admin API, these are two different APIs that come for SCAPI. So your shopper API is used by either the shopper or any trusted system that is acting on behalf of the shopper. Your access secured by the shopper login and API access service. It supports anonymous users, so you can browse using you can use them using a guest user, and it has multiple authentication methods. This is generally read-only except for shopper baskets. So generally the only permission that you have in shopper APIs is to read, except for obviously adding to the basket or removing something from the basket, which is something that the shopper is given the permission to do. All of the APIs that you will see for shopper will start with the name shopper. So you've got shopper baskets or shopper customers, etc. On the other hand, you've got admin APIs. As we discussed, this is more for assignments, catalogs, customers, inventory availability. These are used by administrators or other privileged users, and they have access that is secured by the account manager. And all the authentication is handled exclusively by the account manager. And in this case, you've got permissions to both read and write. And it's designed generally for moderate usage, whereas your SCAPI shopper APIs is designed for high-scale usage, because obviously you'd be expecting a large number of shoppers in different areas who would be making these API calls while they browse to the site, whereas for SCAPI admin APIs, these are generally going to be less frequent, or they're going to be less, you can say, more dissolved or more distributed. Okay, so moving on to SCAPI APIs and how to use them. So for SCAPI APIs, there are a couple of prerequisites that you need to do before you're able to use these APIs. These are everything that is mentioned over here is something that we've actually covered in the previous workshop. So if you're somebody who's just joined this workshop and you have not yet watched the first two, I would suggest that you do that so that you're able to follow through with this. So you need your B2C commerce instance. Obviously, you would need access to an account manager where you would give yourself access to SLAS to generate a client ID and a client secret. This is used for authentication. Your organization ID and short code, which is going to be used as part of the URL. And you need to understand, the API family and version structure in order to be able to complete this. Your SCAPI APIs are grouped into families based on functionality. So there are different ones if you've got shopper products. As you can see that we've mentioned before that all of the names are going to start with shopper. So you can see you've got shopper product, shopper customer, shopper baskets. All of these are responsible for different areas. So for example, shopper products is going to be used for retrieving and searching for product information. You've got customers for managing the customers' login, their accounts and their registration. You've got baskets for handling cards, and you get the gist of it that each API is responsible for something specific. All of these APIs, including their request structure, their parameters, as well as the responses that are expected from them, are covered in the Salesforce Dev Doc. So those of you who have access to Salesforce, the platform, you will be able to access these docs and get a very in-depth idea of how they're working or what they're covering. As we mentioned before, JWT tokens are used for authentication with SLAS. So for both the admin and the shopper APIs, you've got these access tokens that are included as part of the header, and they follow the bearer authentication scheme. So in order to access SCAPI securely, we use the SLAS shopper login and API access service. And depending on the scenario, we can use different grant types. So we can use client credentials, we can use guest, password, refresh token. So we've covered this before as well, where we have multiple authentication systems, and you can use different ways to authenticate. Whenever you have configure, whenever you're going to make a call for an API for that specific client ID that you're using or you're generating your bearer token against, you do need to assign some scopes. Again, we've covered something similar in our previous workshop where we went to the SLAS admin UI and we added some scopes. I can go over that again when we start our exercise where we go to the SLAS admin UI and we are able to add or edit any scopes that we have over there in order to make sure that we get the correct data. For the last topic that we're going to be covering today before moving on to our exercise is extending your SCAPI API. So this is a very common scenario that comes up. Obviously, there are customers with certain customizations or there are certain sort of requirements that are not covered within the SCAPI API endpoints. So for those customers that want to extend it, they want to add some sort of customization that is specific to their store, they do have the option of doing that through two ways, which are basically using hooks or using custom APIs. So first, we're going to discuss how they can use hooks. Hooks basically allow you to alter and extend the behavior existing shopper API resources, and you can do this using the script API. There are times when, for example, you're using an API that exists already, but before, during, or after you make that API call, you want to add something. You want to maybe enrich the data that, or enrich or modify the request that's going, or you want to add some fields to the response that's coming, or you want to do something during that API request. So there are some use cases that would cover this. For example, if you want to modify some search response to include some metadata, if you want to filter some promotions, or you want to add some logging to like checkout response requests, then these are all cases where you might feel like hooks would serve your purpose. The first thing that you're going to do whenever you're going to use hooks or whenever you want to add customization through hooks is you're going to enable it using your business manager. So you're going to head over to your administration, your global preferences, and this path that I've mentioned, and you're going to check enable Salesforce Commerce Cloud API hook execution. After that's done, then you can move on to actually implementing your hook, which is they're different, like I mentioned before, there are different custom logics that you can use. You can use before, after, or modify response. So before you make that request, you might want to add some sort of custom validation, or you want to add some pre-processing before you send that data over there or send that request over. Sometimes when you get the response and you want to modify or enrich the data before it's saved, or maybe you want to modify the response, maybe you want to remove something that was returned from there. So these are different things that you can do using hooks, and you can also register them in your hooks.json file of your cartridge. And all of these are done in your cartridges. So if you're using Safari as a backend, if you're using Site Genesis as a backend, this would be kept as record over there. This is going to run in that backend system of yours. So it's not going to run in PWA Kit. It's going to be hosted on your Safari or Site Genesis code. These are, again, some examples of what you might want to use these hooks for. This is what it looks like. So this is like the structure that it follows in terms of naming. You can see after post, before get, before post. One thing that you need to bear in mind is that for hooks for SCAPI and OCAPI, they use the same implementation. So a single hook can support both. And sometimes this can actually become a problem when you're using hooks to calculate, and sometimes your SCAPI can break if transaction.wrap is misused. So there are times where you would want to verify whether your request is SCAPI or OCAPI so that you can differentiate between them and ensure that everything runs smoothly. You can use this request over here, which is SCAPI, and use it to detect which API is calling the hook and take steps accordingly. So for the next way that we have for extension is using custom APIs. And to move further, basically, this is a framework that has been provided by Salesforce, which enables developers to write custom code and expose this functionality as a REST API under the SCAPI framework. So this allows users to basically create their own APIs directly on the platform, and they're able to use the same authentication tokens with the system APIs. So they're basically able to create endpoints that are just like SCAPI endpoints, but they're their own custom endpoints. And there are different steps that you would want to use. This is there is a lot of an in-depth way of how to use them, how to like structure them, how to write the code for this. But in a very main gist, this is the pattern that you follow, where you have a schema, implementation, and mapping. I have specified what is used for what, and this is the URL pattern that is followed. So you have the /custom/ the API name, the version, the organization's organization ID, and the endpoint. So this is the path that you're going to use as the URL pattern. These custom APIs, they support authentication using SLAS or account manager. They also use versioning like v1, v2. You can use system query parameters like site ID or locale. You can use methods get, post, put, patch, and delete. There are some best practices that are suggested. Obviously, if you're creating your own endpoints, you would need to be careful about how you're using them or what sort of practices you're using, which would ensure that everything on your site runs smoothly and you don't run into any problems. So one of those is using a new code version whenever you're starting. You'd want to use alphanumeric lowercase folder names for the APIs. Always return in JSON, validate your inputs, avoid additional properties. So that's not allowed. You need to ensure that all of the properties are covered within your API and you're not because its additional properties are not supported. Your admin API endpoint should use AMOAuth2, and the shopper endpoint should use shopper token. And you need to ensure that you have robust error handling. Obviously, again, your APIs are going to determine the performance of your site, and you don't want to run into unhandled errors. So you're going to have to take care of that when you're writing custom code. This is just an example over here of what the API could look like. There are some limitations with custom APIs. Generally, if we're talking about them, the first is that the transactions that, can't be committed in the case of GET requests. So you want to make sure you're using put or patch. Again, additional properties is not allowed. So you're going to have to make sure that all of your properties are defined. Your shopper and admin APIs, they have to adhere to the applicable API quotas, which we're going to share below over here. So you see that the shopper APIs have a maximum request runtime of 10 seconds, whereas the SCAPI admin APIs are a little more lenient, so they have a runtime of 60 seconds. And then for shopper APIs, your request body has a size of 5 millibytes, whereas you have 20 in case of admin APIs. And for the business manager activity types, the default quota limits are applicable. However, for shopper APIs, your storefront quota limits are applied, which are much lower. So now we're going to move on to our exercise. There is a postmark collection that is available for Salesforce that you can set up on your end. I've done that over here, and this is where I make my requests for. And before I move on, I just want to show you the scope setting from the SLAS admin UI for those of you who it's your first time watching this workshop, or for those of you who don't recall. This is something that you'd want to make sure that you're doing before you go ahead and start making your SCAPI API calls to ensure that you don't run into any problems. So all right, so we're going to head over to our client, and the client ID that I'm going to be using today is this one. I'm going to use a private client ID against my sandbox number 9. And these are the scopes. So you can see that I'm going to use baskets today, and I do have that added into my scopes. And you would want to make sure that whenever you're going to make a call to a specific SCAPI API endpoint, you want to make sure that you have that scope included in your scopes for that client ID that you're using. So we're going to head back over here. And the task for today is to create a basket and then to get that same basket using SCAPI. The shopper basket. So this is what it looks like. You've got Salesforce, Commerce, B2C, and then you've got all of these under it. You've got shopper baskets over here. These are your shopper APIs. And this is the one that we want to use today. You can see that over here, I require an authorization for bearer token. I've already generated it before, but in case you have not, you would head over here to SLAS and guest user private client. This is what I'm using right now. So it's private client because I'm going to use a client ID and a secret. And I can use this. I'm going to remove the redirect URI and add a channel ID here. And this is going to be the name of my site. This. There you go. So this is my access token. This is my bearer token that I'm going to use in order to access my SCAPI API. We're going to head over to there, create basket and bearer token. So it's right over here. I'm just going to make sure that's the same one. There you go. And I think we're good to go. We can make this call. There you go. So I've created a basket. This is the basket details for my current guest customer, which I've created. And if I want to get the basket, this is probably going to be auto-populated already. Yeah, I've got my basket ID here. I can send this. And there you go. So this is what the SCAPI APIs look like. These are the APIs. You can adjust them wherever you want in the code. I didn't have a specific use case in this case. I just wanted to create an ID for a specific, for any general guest user. I've done that. You can see that the steps are very simple. The first thing that you want to do is create an access token. So you're going to do that using your SLAS. From here, you're going to use authentication. You can use the private client. And basically, when you get your access token, you can pretty much carry out any shopper API that you want to. You can hit any endpoint as long as you have the access and you have the required parameters. You can also obviously implement this on your React storefront and get the results that you want. So that's it for today. We went over a couple of very important topics for composable commerce. We covered our SCAPI, OCAPI, the differences between them, why we would go for SCAPI, what SCAPI looks like, how do you extend SCAPI. So for all of those who were familiar with OCAPI before and who've been working on this for Insight Genesis, I hope that this has been a helpful session. And for those of you who are new to composable commerce, obviously I hope that this really cleared some things up for you regarding what SCAPI and OCAPI are and how to use them. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see you in the next section.